Alaska is becoming America's most vulnerable state, and Donald Trump is the reason. While the world focuses on his trade war with China, Trump's reckless tariff threats against Canada have turned Alaska into a hostage in an international standoff that could starve the last frontier. We're talking about a state where groceries already cost double what they do in the lower 48, now facing the prospect of British Columbia, Premier David Eby wielding toll roads like economic weapons. It's not a bluff, it's a calculated response to Trump's chaotic trade policies, and Alaska is caught in the crossfire. So what exactly is happening? And why is Alaska, of all states, bearing the brunt of Trump's failed diplomacy? To understand that, we have to look at the messy reality of how Alaska gets fed. The situation is more precarious than most Americans realize. Alaska depends heavily on Canada for its food supply chain, with much of the state's fresh produce trucked up through British Columbia. The Alaska Highway, ironically built by the U.S. during World War II as a defense route, has now become Alaska's greatest vulnerability. Trump's tariff threat started in February 2025 when he announced plans to impose 25% tariffs on all goods from Canada and Mexico, plus 10% on Chinese imports. The stated reason? Fentanyl and border security. But the real impact has been economic chaos and deteriorating relations with America's closest ally. The response from Canada was swift and targeted. British Columbia Premier David Eby announced legislation that would allow the province to impose tolls on commercial trucks traveling through BC to Alaska. This isn't just political theater, it's a direct threat to Alaska's food security. Here's why this matters so much. While over 90% of Alaska's cargo arrives by sea, trucks carry the high-value, time-sensitive goods that Alaskans depend on daily. Fresh produce, medical supplies, construction materials, the stuff you can't wait weeks for a barge to deliver. As one Alaska trucking expert put it, if you want to get something to Alaska fast, you put it on a truck, not a barge. The threat became real when Trump actually implemented the tariffs in March 2025, only to pause them, then threaten them again. This on-again, off-again approach has created exactly the kind of uncertainty that damages international relationships and hurts ordinary people. Canada's response has been measured but devastating.
This disruption calls for a bold new approach.
Specifically, a program to help up to 50,000 workers learn new skills, a policy to ensure the government buys Canadian goods, loans for businesses, and more cash for industries hit hard by tariffs.
And we're going to support Canadian workers so they can drive Canada's economic transformation.
The government has announced a comprehensive support package, including skills training for 50,000 workers, new Buy Canadian policies, and financial aid for affected industries. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced counter tariffs on American goods. Ontario Premier Doug Ford added a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. The Yukon government stopped buying from American companies and limited U.S. business access to government contracts. But it's British Columbia's truck toll threat that could devastate Alaska. The province processes about 10,000 trucks bound for Alaska each year. While that might not sound like much, these trucks carry the essential goods that keep Alaska's economy functioning. The Alaska Trucking Association has called the BC proposal deeply concerning, warning it will significantly increase transportation costs, disrupt supply chains, and raise prices for essential goods that Alaskans rely on. The irony is devastating. Trump claimed his tariffs would strengthen America and secure the border. Instead, they've turned one of America's most strategically important states into a bargaining chip in a trade war of his own making. Alaska's border communities are already feeling the pain. In towns like Skagway and Haines, residents routinely cross into Canada for groceries, healthcare, and other necessities. Local business owners report that Canadians are talking about boycotting travel to Alaska in protest of Trump's policies. One Skagway business owner captured the frustration perfectly. "I don't expect Washington to understand the logistical difficulties of living in a small, remote place in the corner of Alaska. This tariff will just make it more expensive to be here." The economic data tells the story of Alaska's vulnerability. Canada is Alaska's fourth largest trading partner, with $596 million in trade in 2023. Alaska's Red Dog mine sends nearly 30% of its zinc to a British Columbia smelter. The state's Nikiski refinery occasionally imports Canadian oil. And if Alaska switches to imported natural gas, the nearest source is in British Columbia. Even Alaska's political leaders recognize the disaster Trump has created. Republican Senator Kathy Giessel introduced a resolution formally opposing the tariffs, stating that the Alaska legislature opposes any restrictive trade measures that would harm the unique relationship between Canada and Alaska. Governor Mike Dunleavy, also a Republican, pleaded for sanity. My hope is that the federal governments between our two great countries work out solutions to the tariff issues, and provincial and state governments refrain from making unilateral decisions that may have negative consequences. But the damage to the relationship may already be done. Premier Eby has made it clear that Canada won't be pushed around. He's called Trump's approach economic war and warned that the U.S. president wants to annex Canada and turn us into the 51st state. The legal challenges to Trump's tariffs have been mounting steadily.
We have seen, at least in the string of victories that the White House has racked up from the Supreme Court, that it looks as though at least 6 of the conservative justices are prepared at least to rule in Donald Trump's favor. Now, we don't know at this time, but based on what we have seen, Donald Trump has won injunctive relief 17 out of the 23 times that he has brought emergency cases before the Supreme Court. Now, just to give some perspective, the Biden administration did not actually seek that many emergency cases before the Supreme Court in their entire 4 years in office. Already we have seen the Trump administration seek that relief more than the Biden administration in just 7 months in office. So what we're seeing here is now there is a growing concern that the Supreme Court is acting more like the legal arm of President Donald Trump than in a third branch of government where they're an actual check. In addition to that, we are learning that there is growing tension and friction between the lower courts, who are being constantly overruled by the Supreme Court as a result of these cases that are continuing to be brought. And also, very quickly, Marcia, I'll also add that what we're also seeing is when the Supreme Court takes up emergency cases, they don't necessarily have to provide a justification why they ruled the way they did. They could just simply rule on an up or down vote from the 9 justices, which also makes it very difficult to understand or ascertain how, in fact, the justices came up with the...
In May 2025, the Court of International Trade declared the tariff executive orders illegal, though they remain in effect during appeals. The case is now heading to the Supreme Court, where Trump has historically won injunctive relief 17 out of 23 times when bringing emergency cases. Legal experts worry the Supreme Court may be acting more as a legal arm of President Trump rather than as an independent check on executive power. Meanwhile, the economic impact on American families has been severe. According to the Tax Foundation, Trump's tariffs amount to an average tax increase of nearly $1,300 per U.S. household in 2025, rising to $1,600 in 2026. For Alaska, the impact is even worse. The state already pays some of the highest food prices in the nation due to transportation costs. Adding tariffs and potential Canadian tolls creates a perfect storm of price increases. The situation reveals a fundamental flaw in Trump's understanding of trade. Tariffs aren't paid by foreign countries, they're paid by American importers and passed on to American consumers. In Alaska's case, that means families paying even more for groceries that already cost twice the national average. Canadian officials have described what's happening as more than just a trade dispute, calling it a fundamental rupture in the global trade system.
Wants to go ahead with tariffs against countries in the world, and that many countries right now are not necessarily abiding by the free trade rules. So that's creating a lot of instability, and we're at a moment of rupture with that free trade system that we have known for decades. So we have to be ready because, of course, it comes with disruption. It comes with the fact that businesses cannot take the same type of decision as they took for years based on geopolitics that were stable. No. And so what we're doing today is not only are we acting now for what we're dealing with definitely the trade tariffs
Right.
against key sectors, but we're laying down the foundation for the future prosperity of Canada. And so we want to make sure that we're ready. So we're not waiting for things to go badly. We're in action mode. We come up with an EI flexible approach, and also we're coming up with rescaling.
Industry Minister Melanie Joly explained that this moment requires Canada to pivot from reliance on the U.S. to building domestic resilience through defense industries, housing construction, and partnerships with Europe and Asia. The government is implementing a transformative economic strategy to move from reliance to resilience, from uncertainty to prosperity. Canada has tried to minimize the impact on ordinary people while still sending a strong message. The government established exemptions for hospitals, long-term care facilities, and fire departments. They've also encouraged Canadians to buy domestic products instead of American ones, shifting federal procurement policy from best efforts to a clear obligation to buy Canadian products.
Mark Carney also promising more federal action for the Buy Canadian movement.
The government's introducing a new comprehensive Buy Canadian policy that will move from best efforts to buy Canadian to a clear obligation to do so.
No word on what that means for the deal to buy American F-35 fighter jets, still under review by the government, while a new climate competitiveness strategy was announced as coming soon.
But the broader message is clear. Canada won't be bullied by Trump's erratic trade policies. Premier Eby has legislation ready to impose truck tolls whenever needed, describing it as having tools available if required. The international implications extend beyond North America. China, Canada, and the European Union have all imposed retaliatory tariffs on American goods. Trump's trade war has isolated the United States from its closest allies and trading partners. For Alaska, this represents a strategic nightmare. The state that was once seen as America's northern fortress has become its most vulnerable point. The very highway built to defend Alaska during World War II could now be used to economically strangle it. The human cost is already visible in Alaska's border towns. Tourism operators report Canadians canceling Alaska trips in protest. Local businesses that depend on cross-border trade are bracing for economic pain. Families are watching grocery prices climb even higher. Trump's defenders might argue that tariffs are negotiating tools. But when your negotiating strategy involves threatening your closest ally and putting your own citizens at risk, you're not showing strength, you're showing incompetence. The Alaska situation perfectly illustrates the broader failure of Trump's trade approach. Instead of building stronger relationships with allies to counter real threats like China's economic aggression, Trump has picked fights with Canada and Mexico, countries that share thousands of miles of border with the United States. The resolution of this crisis will likely determine Alaska's economic future. If Trump continues his confrontational approach, Alaska could face years of higher prices, supply chain disruptions, and damaged relationships with its northern neighbors. Alternatively, if cooler heads prevail and the U.S. returns to normal trade relations with Canada, Alaska could recover its position as a bridge between North America's two largest economies. But the damage to trust may take much longer to repair. Canada has learned that it can't rely on stable, predictable trade policy from the United States. They're already diversifying their trade relationships and building domestic supply chains to reduce dependence on American markets. The Alaska crisis is just one example of how Trump's chaotic approach to international relations creates real-world consequences for American families. When you pick fights with your closest allies, ordinary Americans pay the price. For Alaska, that price could be measured in empty grocery shelves, higher heating costs, and an economy increasingly cut off from its natural trading partners. All because Trump thought tariffs were a good way to show strength. Instead, he's shown the world that America under his leadership is unreliable, unpredictable, and willing to hurt its own citizens to score political points. Alaska is paying the price for Trump's failures, and there's no end in sight. The last frontier has become the first casualty of Trump's trade war. a war that never should have been fought and can't be won. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how Trump's other failed policies are hurting American families, check out our other videos. And make sure to subscribe for more coverage of how political incompetence creates real-world consequences.